From the U.S. House of Representatives, we're honored to have with us Oklahoma Representative James Lankford. And all of our hearts are very heavy for the people of Oklahoma, and we appreciate all the more Representative Lankford making time to be with us this morning. We know that his heart is heavy, and he has a lot of responsibilities going on, but he understands how important this session is and wanted to be with you this morning. He was first elected to the U.S. Congress in 2010. And before his election, he served as director of the largest youth camp in the United States, called Falls Creek, with 150 staff members and more than 51,000 students and adults that attended every summer. Congressman Lankford serves on the House committees on budget and oversight and government reform. That's got to be a busy job. He's also chairman of the subcommittee on energy policy, health care, and entitlements. He now comes with this special report directly for you from the U.S. House of Representatives here in Washington, D.C. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Oklahoma Representative James Lankford.
Well, that's very kind of you. And thank you for praying for us in Oklahoma. This has been a tough week for us, to say the least. There is a great deal outside of the limelight that people do not see. I was there on Monday morning. We had tornadoes that came through Shawnee, Oklahoma on Sunday. That was about a 20-mile path, just as large of a storm as it came through Moore, but it hit a mostly rural area. But for those families that were affected, they were devastated. And then walked through that on Monday morning, and then by the time I got here Monday afternoon, the storm was coming down in Moore. Turned right back around and head back on Tuesday. It is miles and miles of path of destruction and will take a very long time. And for those of you that are giving or encouraging folks to give through your denominational offices and local churches, we've encouraged countless people to give money directly through their churches because they can oversee the distribution of those funds, and they know exactly what family, and they can follow up with those families in the very long days ahead. And so thank you for that support. As was mentioned, member of the House of Representatives, and as pastors, I would say to you, the amazing part is not that you're listening to a member of the House of Representatives. The amazing part is I'm a former youth pastor of 22 years, and pastors are listening to a youth minister for a moment. So that's the real revival movement that's happening here all of a sudden. So yeah. Let me talk you through several things here. For my wife and I, we've been married 21 years. We have two daughters, 16 and 13 years old, and family is a very big deal to us. We talk about it constantly with the people at home. And we remind people over and over again, if you're looking to Washington to solve the issues of the family, we will not solve it in Washington. It'll be solved in the church. That's where it will be fixed. And so I want to give you an update. I want to give you some background and also be able to lay some groundwork of a few things that are happening. And then if you don't mind, I have a few words of encouragement as well, and a little bit of exhortation I'll slip in maybe. Well, let me tell you a brief story, though, about a small business that's in my district. The small business in my district in Bethany, Oklahoma, is a dad in his garage with $600 has started this little frame shop. And this little frame shop where his two sons work together with him to be able to nail frames together that they sell out, and it couldn't be more Americana in small-town Bethany, Oklahoma, with the dad and his sons working. Well, that little frame shop has grown up a little bit. And eventually they hired some folks, and they made a decision that they were going to practice their business based on biblical values. They were going to close early on Wednesday, and they were going to be closed entirely on Sunday. It's a great thing. It's a big decision for them to make because they're going to practice biblical principles in their business. Well, here's my question. What if the federal government stepped into that little frame shop in Bethany, Oklahoma, and said, your employees do not earn enough money to make a living wage because you aren't open on Sunday and they can't get enough hours. So we're going to require you to be open on Sunday and to be open on Wednesday night. And if you don't, we're going to fine you $36,500. What would you think about that? You'd say, that's absurd, right? That would never happen in America. The federal government can't force them to be open on Sunday because it's against their faith. Well, okay, what if I expand this story? What if I tell you the dad in this story, his name is David Green? And the frame shop was called Greco Products, but they later changed the name to Hobby Lobby. And the two sons that worked in his business were his two sons that made 7 cents a frame for nailing the frames together when they started their little frame shop in his garage. And that has now grown up to be a business all over the country. One thing I did change, it's not about opening and closing on Sundays. It's about whether they can practice the biblical principle in their business that they have from the very beginning, that they don't want to provide for free abortifacient drugs to their employees. That's it. I mean, it's not even have it in the insurance at all. It's just that it has to be provided for free. He's determined that's against his faith. David Green actually has the audacity to believe that life begins at conception, and that in the eyes of God, in the eyes of our true American value of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, he wants his company to support his values as it has from the very beginning. At 2 o'clock today, Hobby Lobby will be in front of the 10th Circuit. They've already lost 2 appeals, and they're now to a full en blanc in the 10th Circuit today in Denver. They would appreciate your prayers. They will stand before 8 judges, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, and they have to win at least a 5-3 majority to win, to overturn lower court decisions. To be able to make this one simple declaration, to be able to ask that in America, the Constitution has more importance than the opinion of the Secretary of HHS. This is not about one company. This is about a value in America. Can a business run their business based on biblical principles in America? That's the decision that's really being made. This is a stark moment when the administration is saying, I know your values, Hobby Lobby. I know your values. I know your faith. We have a different set of values in this administration. You will change your values and principles to ours, or we will fine you out of existence. Here's what it looks like, and this is how real it really is. If you don't provide insurance for your employees, under the Affordable Care Act, you will be fined $2,000 per person per year. If you don't provide insurance, your company gets a $2,000 fine. But if your company does provide insurance, but it doesn't provide abortifacient drugs on that insurance, your company will be fined $36,500 per person per year. Now let that soak in for a moment. You don't think this administration is not serious about this? You will capitulate to their will on this, or they will fine you out of existence. $2,000 if you don't provide insurance at all. If you don't provide the insurance with the abortifacient drugs, $36,500 per year per employee until you cave. Hobby Lobby has said, we're not going to cave. We practice biblical principles from the start. We're going to finish with that. So what are we going to do about it? I've already asked you to be able to pray about this with them. It's a big deal, and this is a big day. The House of Representatives is also in the process of trying to move a piece of legislation that will protect the Americans' rights to operate their business based on biblical principles or on no principles at all of the Bible, whichever one they choose. And it's amazing to me in America, we have to even try to pass a piece of legislation that you have to do that. But here's our problem. We can pass that bill in the House, but we don't need to pass a bill. We've got to make law on this. This comes down in August. So the challenge for us is to be able to pass it in such a way and move a piece that we can actually accomplish law rather than just making a statement. That's our challenge, and that's what we're trying to work on. If you haven't noticed, this president doesn't seem real crazy about rolling back any of the power that he acquired in his first 2 years of his presidency. And that's what this piece of legislation giving conscious protections to business owners would do, is roll back part of his power. So that's going to be our challenge for the next several months, along with many others. But this doesn't stop. And it has moved for months. This is not new. In 2011, the U.S. Council of Catholic Bishops, who had had the contract for human trafficking and taking care of human trafficking for the federal government, just providing services and connection points. That's all they did. They located people that were experiencing human trafficking and trapped in that, women and children, and they helped connect them with the help that they needed. The federal government said, you can no longer do that with a federal contract unless you promote abortion. Now watch this, not provide, promote. Because the grant had nothing to do with the provision of abortion. It was only they had to actively promote abortion or they would lose the grant, and they walked away from it. It wasn't that long ago. It wasn't that long ago that Catholic chaplains had a section of their Sunday sermon in the United States military edited by this administration because it included a line they didn't like from their bishops, reaching directly into one of their sermons and pulling out a section and saying, you can't say that as a Catholic chaplain. I spoke to a general in the Army just a couple of weeks ago who said to me he's already receiving phone calls from chaplains saying, can we share our faith now? Have the rules changed? What should we do? We're freezing until we know the difference. Can we speak out or not? Ladies and gentlemen, this is the United States of America. Chaplains do not walk in and take a vow of silence when they also take their oath to serve their country in the United States military. Let me tell you what's really happened. Some of you know this history and this tradition, but there's a Supreme Court case on Hosanna Tabor where the administration argued that they can go into a church or a church-based organization and determine who their ministers are. True story. A Christian school had released one of their ministers, and the administration said, you can't do that, you have to hire them back, and argued all the way to the Supreme Court, saying the federal government has the authority to select for a church or church organization their minister and can compel them to hire them. The administration lost that in the Supreme Court 9-0. Now, when this Supreme Court rules against something 9-0, that would tell you they've gone a bridge too far. But they've not stopped in this. So how do we continue to press on? Because we can't ignore all these realities. In the House of Representatives in the last session, we reduced Title X funding to Planned Parenthood. We put in 17 pro-life riders in the appropriations bills and guarded those, and they passed it and made it into law. We added funding into absence education and all this funding that's going out for sex ed to be able to add in absence education funding to help balance some of that out. We put in conscience protections for the military chaplains, and apparently we're going to have to do that again. When the president did his what I call retroactive veto on the Defense of Marriage Act, that is, he invented a new power to say, if I would have been president at the time this passed, I would have vetoed it, and so I'm not going to enforce this law. And so we in the House of Representatives have funded the defense for the Defense of Marriage Act. The lawyers and all the process that it paid to go all the way through the Supreme Court were not done by the administration where it's typically done to guard a law. It was funded directly through the budget of the House of Representatives to make sure that we were protecting that all the way. Now, I cannot begin to predict what this Supreme Court will do. But in the Obamacare case, they argued that they, as the Supreme Court, had to find every way possible to uphold every law that was duly passed by Congress and signed by the President. May I remind you, the Defense of Marriage Act was passed overwhelmingly in the House and the Senate and signed by President Bill Clinton. This is the law of the land, and if they choose to remain consistent with how they ruled on the Affordable Care Act, I would assume that they would remain consistent and also rule to protect the Defense of Marriage Act, a law just like it, passed by Congress and signed by the President. We'll watch and see. Life is an essential value. You know that as well as I do. Kermit Gosnell trial has pulled back the curtain of the abortion industry and has demonstrated to the nation what it really looks like. This is not some clean, sterile surgical procedure with some piece of tissue being removed. This is not a skin tag or a mole being taken off your face. This is the brutality of pulling children apart in the womb, and in Kermit Gosnell's case, taking them out of the womb, snipping their spinal cord with scissors 3 feet from their mother, and some of those children just leaving them on the counter to die. Welcome to the abortion industry in America. Life is essential. We will take up in the days ahead a pain-capable bill to protect life, that when a child can experience pain, they should be protected. Quite frankly, we believe all life should be protected. We will take up no taxpayer funding for abortion. We will take up what we call the Prenatal Non-Discrimination Act. Now watch this. This is a simple bill to say we should not have sex or race-based abortions in America. That's what China does. We should not do that. We are not communist China. You should not look in the womb and say, you know what, I really wanted a boy, so I think I'll kill that girl and keep trying until I get a boy. How absurd is that? Take up a simple bill to say you can't kill a child just because you don't like their gender. You can't kill a child just because you don't like their race. And you happen to have an interracial relationship. And so you decide, I'm just going to kill that child. No, 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 no. That's life. And it should be protected. In the coming months, we'll also take up legislation dealing with school choice and the Common Core. We'll take up welfare reform, dealing with families, and what happens in our law dealing with the statutes of how do we protect it. Let me just tell you a conversation I had. A conversation I had with a gentleman and a lady who were not married and hadn't been married for a long time. And quite frankly, I'm not very shy about marriage. I love my wife, and I like other people to be married. So I smiled at him and said, why aren't you married? He said, I'm not married because I'm on Social Security disability and I'd lose part of my money if I got married. God forbid that our federal government would discourage marriage. We should stand for marriage. And so we've got to go through our welfare laws and find ways to be able to protect and encourage marriage, and that will be upcoming this year as well. Listen, American families have never been perfect. We get that. We get nostalgic sometimes about what things used to be like. I did like to see a lot more people married. I did like to see people actually having children in wedlock. The order is kind of important to me. I reinforce that to my children. I'd like to have grandchildren after a marriage. But we understand this. The system is currently broken, and it's not a governmental system that's broken. It's a family structure that's broken. That does not get fixed in Washington. Listen, John the Baptist, he's recognized all the time for the baptism of Jesus, but you understand when Zechariah heard the words from the angel, when he found out they were about to have a child, the prophecy was, he will turn the hearts of the fathers back to their children. That was the renewing that was needed at that moment. That's the call we've got to take back again. That does not happen from Washington, D.C. I'm going to do my part, but we're absolutely dependent on the church. There has not been a new declaration that's come out and said, hope of the earth used to be in the gospel and in the church, but now it's in D.C. No. It remains in the same place that it's been. And that is in your hands. Would you encourage families to mentor young families? There are thousands of people that live around you that have never seen a functioning marriage ever. Those older retired families in your church could make a huge difference in the next generation and in our nation if they would mentor a young family, if they teach a new young couple how to be married and how to raise their children. It'd make a huge difference. We're dependent on you to be able to stand up for culture. It will be changed, as it's always changed, through the church. But let me make one admonition to you as well. The church is the cornerstone for the gospel. If churches wander into politics and that's all they ever talk about, no one else picks up the gospel. We have to stay centrally focused on the gospel. The hope of the earth and the transition of the souls of men happens in that wonderful message of forgiveness. Keep it central, but don't you dare back up from culture. We have people that sit in our church pews that all week long around the water cooler and at their office and on emails and on the news, they heard about the events of the week, and then Sunday they hear nothing about their real life days and the argument that's happening in culture, and they assume either the Bible has nothing to say about it, my pastor doesn't know anything about this, or it doesn't matter. It does. The Bible does speak to it, and you know how to practice it. Can you also, in your church, find people that are engaged in government and mentor them? One of the roles of the church is to equip people that function in government on how to practice biblical concepts in their life and in their governance. If you will mentor people, spend time with them and encourage them, and I know I'm around some of those folks, including myself. There are lots of folks in government think they have all the answers. Get them one-on-one in your office, they'll tell you they don't. They need your accountability. They need you to push them in their spiritual walk and in their Bible study and their prayer. They need that one-on-one time with you. Please invest time for individuals that are in your church to mentor and hold them accountable, because it is a role of the church to raise up godly leaders. And we need your help in that. There's a drought in Oklahoma about a year ago. And in the lake that's right in the middle of Oklahoma City, that I go past all the time, it's the main water body for Oklahoma City. As that drought took its hold, we watched that water go down and down and down and down to sections of that lake that you could walk out hundreds of feet out into the middle of it. And there's this huge big puddle, muddy puddle in the middle of it. And as our community watched that, the sailboats that are around that lake that are all tied up and docked there went from floating to down to sitting in mud to sitting in the dry land. And the oldest boats and the weakest boats couldn't sustain the damage. There's a cultural drought going on. And I guarantee the oldest and the weakest will be the hardest hit in this cultural drought. And those who say they stand up for the weakest should look and see what our culture has done to the weakest in our nation. It is our responsibility to fulfill the call of Elijah to pray for rain and to engage again in very practical ways. Because where things have fallen apart, it is our responsibility to bring healing. It is time for us to turn the hearts of the fathers back to their children, and for the church to do what only the church can do: mentor, disciple, equip, hold accountable, love and care, and bandage the broken, and assume Washington is what it is, the lagging indicator of our culture, not the one who turns around our culture, and live out what God has called you to do. We will do our part. We will. But God willing, we'll do it together. Thanks for what you're doing. This youth pastor appreciates it a great deal.